Well, sometimes you'll have a fragment of code that you want to use over and over again in your program, but it needs to have values that are driven from outside. You'd like to be able to make a my block that has a data hub on it. Well, nxt-g lets you do that. For example, I have a program here that's a wall follower, and it right now follows the wall for a certain number of rotations. Well, maybe I'd like to be able to change that number of rotations depending on what I'm doing inside my program. So this will get a little bit complicated, but it's not too bad. I'm going to go ahead and bring up a rotation sensor reading block. What this does is just read the value of a rotation sensor. I'm going to change my loop from being a rotation sensor loop to being a logic loop. What that means is it's going to loop as long as the value feeding into it is either true or false. So in this case, I'm going to have it loop until the value turns true and then do something. So I need to provide that true value from someplace. Well, this rotation sensor reading block lets me do that. It starts out with just a couple of different things on its data hub, but if you click on the drop down, it'll get the full value. And one of the things that it lets you do is tell you whether or not it's reached a certain rotation. So I'm going to take that output and wire it here into my loop. Well, how did I know that? Well, I'm not that smart. I got help. And so if you bring up the help on the rotation sensor block down at the bottom, you'll see that there's lots of different outputs, and one of them is the result of the comparison, yes or no. I could have just as easily used the greater than or less than input. So I've got something now that I can wire in a certain number of degrees or rotations. I'm going to do it in rotations, let's say. And so now it's going to go round and round and round until it's reached 5 rotations. Well, that's the equivalent of what I had before. But now I have an input that I could drive from someplace else. I'm going to give it someplace to get the value from right now, so I'm going to pick a math block, put it outside here. I'm just doing this so that I'll get a number, and you'll see what I'm going to do with it later. So I'm going to take my number here, go on over, and I'm going to wire it into the trigger point. I know it's the trigger point is where I want to go because I was clever and looked at that help before. That's this value here. And so because I've got something wired into it from the outside, it's going to override whatever I put over in here. So what's going to happen now is this loop's going to go spinning around until it reaches the trigger point, which will be the value that's coming from the outside. Right now it's from this math block. Just so that you can see, math blocks have, your basic math kind of functions, and you can add up 2 values. Those values could be supplied here, or they could come from someplace else via the data hub. But now that I've got my wall follower that's going to take an outside value, I'm going to select it, go up here and say make a new my block. And it's going to grind away for a while, and I'm going to say wall follower deluxe. And I could type a description if I wanted to. I'll give it an icon. Finish it. And now I've got a wall follower that has its very own data hub. If I go and bring out more of them, this is my wall follower deluxe again, then it's got a data hub that pops down just like a real live block. So this lets you create my blocks that get values from outside. You could do more than one value. Mine just happened to have 1, so 1 is all that it dropped down.